Good Friday morning, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Finding God in the Dark. My name is Don.
And my name is,
Were you not sure there for a second? You
yeah,
paused a
kind of,
little.
I kind of forgot. What was my name?
What? Who am I again? Uh,
Look, it's almost Easter week. I'm a pastor. I don't know my name sometimes. Okay.
Preaching to the choir, Jonathan. You're preaching to the choir. So, friends, the film that we watched for this week is a film that many of us know. It is The Passion of the Christ. Came out in 2004. Uh, partially written and directed by Mel Gibson, starring Jim Caviezel and Monica Bellucci, among others. It is, according to IMDb, it is a depiction of the final 12 hours of the life of Jesus on the day of his crucifixion.
Yeah.
Um, where do we want to start on this one, John?
Um, I guess what I would tell folks is that this was really, I mean, I didn't talk with Mel Gibson, obviously, but I would argue that he made this movie to be devotional more than historical.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
And so, for example, you see the 14 stages of the cross in the traditional form.
Hmm.
Um, Two of those are things that aren't in the Bible specifically. One is less of a stretch, I would argue, than the other. One is him seeing his mother on the way, kind of encountering Mary on the way. That's not in the Bible, but to be honest, I feel like that's not that much of a stretch.
Right.
The other is the story of Veronica wiping his face. That isn't in scripture, and that developed in tradition over the first couple hundred years. But
Okay.
again, the traditional 14 stages of the cross are all covered here. Uh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that idea, okay, that there were other things that were added.
Yeah.
There's several scenes where the devil is there.
Mhm.
He don't appear in the scriptures after the temptation.
Yeah.
So all of that is an addition. It's I think in some ways it's interesting. In that, we as faithful people, I think we would understand, yeah, he's watching.
There's
Um,
evil in the world. Yeah. I would argue it would have, if for me at least, I'll just take it from me. And I actually show this every year on Good Friday. I have my church open from 12 to 3. And
mhm,
for probably 5+ years, I've shown it to churches I've served during that time on Good Friday.
okay.
And so I watch it 1.5 times every year because I'm in the sanctuary for the entire thing. Um, what I would say though is that um, there definitely is. I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of. I would have preferred, I guess, the devil being in the background more and just being kind of like when the devil walks through the crowd, like during Jesus's whipping,
Right.
that I feel like is really effective. The devil during the temptation in the garden or the struggle in the garden, that I felt like in a lot of ways that was effective. But like the devil giving birth to a weird baby, like that, those kind of moments kind of
Yeah.
took me out of the situation. So if I could
Yeah.
have given a note to Mr. Gibson, it would have been put the devil in the background more.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And that's part of it. Mel Gibson is a practicing Catholic.
Mhm.
So this film comes across very Catholic. I
He's
don't know too many churches that practice Stations of the Cross.
he's actually mad at the Catholic Church because he and his family don't recognize Vatican II. So they actually, I don't, I, at least his father did not believe there had been a valid pope since Pope maybe John the Second. So like in the 50s. So they're uber Catholic. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, what I would also say is, did you find it weird that the devil seems to disappear at the cross? That seemed kind of weird to me because I don't remember the devil being in the cross scenes. Like
Hmm.
And so I thought that was weird to have the devil kind of be this presence, and then at the culmination of his death, the devil not being there. It just seemed kind of odd.
Is that, and I'm only, obviously I'm just supposing like
Yeah,
you are, but
yeah,
is that a statement about he's facing his final defeat and can't stand it, you know?
yeah.
Like up to that
I,
point everything was, yeah, I'm winning here, and now he's not winning. I don't know.
what's interesting is, and I won't get too nerdy on this because we would lose everybody, and maybe even lose you. But you can see a lot of atonement theories being sprinkled in here.
Right,
So, and one of the first atonement theories that Christians over the centuries have jettisoned, but one of the first ones in early Christianity was this idea that the devil had ownership of humanity, and God paid uh, the devil essentially basically a ransom slash trick the devil
right,
into killing Jesus when he didn't have the right to kill Jesus because Jesus hadn't sinned. And so you have that even in here at the beginning where the devil goes, "Who are you and who is your father?" Like, so there was a part of me that's
right.
like, you may want to have let uh, that atonement theory go and just,
Yeah,
you know,
I think we're pretty sure that he knew who Jesus was.
yeah,
There's other parts of the
yeah,
scriptures that tell us he knew who Jesus
yeah,
was.
yeah. Again, that is an atonement theory. It's one of the earliest in the church, but
Hmm.
over the centuries, we've jettisoned it because of the stickiness about the idea that the devil owns people. Like that
Yeah,
was, yeah,
yeah. I'll tell you from my part, and I mentioned this right before we started the
yeah,
film, that, and I'm going to call this sort of a testimony to how our faith grows and changes over time.
hmm,
Because it's been a number of years, probably 8 or 10 years since I've watched this last.
yeah.
I have seen it. In fact, I saw it twice in theaters when it first came out. I took, God bless the youth group kids that put up with me in my first appointment. I took them to go see it while they were doing the 30-hour famine.
Woo.
Okay. Yeah. You're welcome, kids.
Did they put you up on
But
a cross?
they wanted to. But um, my perception of it this time felt different than when I've seen it before. I was really, I mean, literally, when they were scourging him, every time they struck him, I flinched. And
Yeah,
I don't remember doing that in the past. I also sat there kind of picking things apart a little bit, like we do here on the podcast,
yeah,
but, looking at going, no, that's not in there. No, that's not right. No, that sort of thing. So, if you hold it up, I think in comparison to some of the films that we have watched, like Jesus of Nazareth or the Gospel of John, it definitely has a very different tone.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I know this sounds weird, but it actually is too violent. Uh, Jesus,
I can't disagree with that. Yeah.
Jesus would have been scourged. There's no question about that.
Hmm.
But the traditional understanding at the time was 40 lashes could kill somebody. So my guess is you if you count them all up, he basically gets hit or beaten about 40 times twice. So you're looking about half of that amount is probably what he would have received. Now,
Right.
it was horrible and it would have hurt. And scourging actually was part of the Roman process because damaging your back made it harder for you to go up and down to breathe on the cross, which
Right.
made the punishment of the cross much more painful. And so
Yeah.
scourging, and that's part of the problem I had was the other criminals, the two criminals would have been scourged too. Like they would have been scourged too, because again, it's part of the punishment because they want to make this as painful and hard for the people on the cross as possible.
Right. Because well, we've talked about this
Yeah,
before, you had to
yeah.
pull yourself up to
Self up to
breathe. So you've
breathe.
been rubbing against that cross.
Yeah, yeah,
And that was one of the other things that I think we've talked about before in the practice of crucifixion by the Roman Empire. You didn't carry that whole
yeah.
cross.
Yeah,
You
and that's
carried
that.
just the crossbeam, like the criminals did,
Well, again,
but
that's
not
the
like
yeah.
Jesus did.
that's the thing that I struggled with. I get he wants to highlight Jesus and make him different. I get that. But to me, to get to get the setup right with the criminals means he knew how it was actually done. And so it's
Right,
a choice to make Jesus's different.
right.
And in a weird way, I was bothered by that because I'm like, we shouldn't be we shouldn't just be bothered because Jesus had to endure this. We should have been bothered because anybody had to endure this. This isn't
Right.
a way you should deal with criminals. Like that, it's not a good way to deal with criminals. Whatever the criminals are, it's not a
And
good way to deal with them.
the other part of that is, okay, you didn't just hold the crossbeam.
Yeah,
They tied it to your
yeah,
hands, and your hands were out like this. So
mhm,
if you stumbled and fell,
yeah.
you can't catch yourself. You're going
Yeah.
right on your face.
Yes. And
Um,
again, they did it correctly with the two criminals. How they did it, for best of our knowledge, is how the criminals did it. They tie your hands to the crossbar, and then you have to carry the crossbar, kind of maneuver through the city.
right.
You know, and again, I get he's trying to be devotional. I get he's trying to make Jesus different. But to me, it's powerful to know other people went through this. It's powerful to know that other people got whipped, other people got had to carry a cross. Like,
Right.
you know, to me, it
And
doesn't
and
lessen what
I
Jesus.
think he also misses the mark of not necessarily that we are to go to the cross and sacrifice ourselves in the same way, but that at least we are to emulate Christ. So I mean, you've lost something here by making him different,
Yeah.
you know?
The other thing I thought was interesting was I felt like every time someone or something was shown to be evil, they were presented as ugly. And I really struggle with that. One, because of all the stuff people that are not beautiful often go through because of their looks, but also because I don't think it works that way. I think a lot of times the evil things
You
we
don't
are
wait,
tempted
wait.
by,
You don't have to think it doesn't work that way. You are correct in that it does not work that way.
yeah. I really feel like a lot of the things we are tempted with and we struggle with, especially in American modern culture, are beautiful and enticing and
Oh
are
yeah.
not physically ugly or repulsive.
Yeah.
And so it bothered me that like Barabbas doesn't have to be a toothless guy with one bad eye. Like that doesn't have to be who he is.
Right. Right.
Um, you know, I also thought it was an interesting choice to have Judas tormented by, I guess, evil spirits. Like,
Yeah, that whole scene.
yeah,
I forgot that scene.
yeah,
That it starts out with him just grieving over what he's done,
yeah,
which okay, we can go there. I get that because we're told he hung himself. Okay, so he certainly regretted his action. But then it starts out with that he's just grieving. He's in the square, and then these children notice him, and then as they're kind of teasing him, their faces change. And then there's this whole crowd of children. This is for people who haven't seen it. This whole crowd of children that chase him out of the city where he goes out and he finds, I'm assuming it's the donkey that Jesus rode in the week before is now dead
yeah,
and takes the rope off it and hangs himself.
yeah.
But that whole
Um,
scene was just like,
yeah.
where does that come from?
Well, there was a part of me that I struggle. One of the biggest part I show this movie because I want people to think about what Jesus went through, and there's no better movie that shows kind of what he went through.
Fair, yeah.
Um, but there are elements to this movie that really bother me. One of the key things I think the cross shows is that God triumphs and defeats evil. Again, um, atonement theory, Christus Victor, defeats evil by forgiveness and mercy and pouring that out, right?
Right,
And so to then have seemingly God punish Judas or punish the criminal that turns away from Jesus, you know, to me undercuts this idea that God is pouring out grace and mercy.
You're
like,
talking about the one on the cross
yeah,
who was tormenting Jesus and
yeah,
then had his eye poked out by
yeah,
a raven.
yes, yeah. Those moments of kind of, it's hard to read them other than kind of God getting back at the people who are hurting Jesus, to
Yeah.
me undermines, to me, one of the key pieces of the gospel, which is God defeats evil and sin and death by love, grace, and forgiveness. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Yeah. That's I think that's what makes this, I used to I think the first couple of times I saw this, it was just like, oh, what a great film, what a great film. And now I'm just, I'm a little more ambivalent about it. I mean, it's definitely has its merit. I think that it is well acted.
yeah.
I think that it's the cinematography is great. There's a lot of stuff to like about this film, but then there's some challenging stuff that obviously we brought up a little bit of it. Um, what else?
Um, how did you? Because as I'm growing in my understanding of the early church and kind of being open to a lot of the theology of the early church, I'm coming to terms. I grew up Baptist, where um, my grandfather probably wouldn't have been okay with the idea that Mary was the Theotokos, the mother of God. Like, he probably would have struggled with that idea,
Hmm.
and he had a very negative, when he talked about Mary. He often talked about her um, kind of as overemphasized the idea of her being a sinner and being kind of bad, and and
Is that just that sort of antagonist relationship between Baptists and Catholics?
Catholic. It was
Yeah.
absolutely that. But that's
Yeah.
what I was raised with, right? But the Catholic Church and to be honest, the Orthodox Church as well views and often talks about Mary as being the mother of the church. That in that scene where the beloved disciple, even though we always call him John, in the text it just says the beloved disciple.
Right.
When the beloved disciple is given Mary as his mother, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church have read that as a universal Jesus blessing us all with her as our mother and someone to kind of walk alongside us,
Mm.
right? And I'm not to the point where I would say a lot of Catholic and Orthodox folks are with Mary, but I've realized that I have done her a disservice by thinking that to highlight her is to downgrade Jesus. And so I do think it's beautiful to be reminded of this gift of a mother, this gift of somebody to walk alongside. I think there's deep beauty in that we probably shouldn't throw away as Protestants.
And I agree with you. I've been in well, I've only served Methodist churches,
Yeah, yeah,
and I was not raised in a different tradition. I
yeah,
was raised kind of with no faith tradition, but um, uh, uh, particularly in my previous church, we had some of the folks who were helped design the worship service were very much about that. And when Mary's Magnificat would come up around Christmas time, we had to do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I'm okay with that. I mean, I think there's a balance in that. I don't venerate Mary
yeah.
as a saint or as anything, but there's something important to being the mother of Jesus.
Mhm.
You know, so we find that balance there, and I think Methodists we do that a lot. We do that with a lot of things. We got to find that balance in between.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some. I think if it was true, and I kind of lean toward believing it was true, if she functioned for a lot of the disciples as a mother figure, I think that's beautiful. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
and I do think it's powerful to be reminded of the fact that there were people that chose to go through this with Jesus. Because we tend to focus on, I'm doing a sermon series on Peter, so we tend to focus on the people that ran away or betrayed or denied. And we should, that's part of the text. But I also think it's beautiful to be reminded there were women and there was the beloved disciple at the cross being there with him, offering him support and care the way they could. I think
Right.
that's beautiful too. It's a reminder that we're not always betraying Jesus. We also can can go alongside with Jesus as well.
And it's a reminder, I think, particularly for us as pastors, but really for anybody, that suffering is part of life, and sometimes all you can do is stand by and be supportive.
Yeah,
The life lesson here, right?
yeah,
That I thought going to seminary, maybe I've said this before, going to seminary is going to get all the answers. And I
yeah,
came out with more questions. And a
yeah.
lot of that has to do with there are no set and pat answers. Every situation requires you to to understand the situation.
And
Um,
I do think now, I think we have a tendency to believe our communion, our tradition, our denomination has all the right answers and everyone else is crazy.
wait,
But
wait, we don't?
yeah, I know. But I do think it's worthwhile exploring and learning about other Christian traditions because I do think I've known in my own life I found a lot of beautiful things I'm glad that I found and I wouldn't have found them. Like I
Mm.
literally wear this bracelet so I can say the Jesus prayer. I wouldn't have known the Jesus prayer if I didn't learn about Orthodox Christianity. Like so that's been a blessing in my life. So one of the things that's nice about this is the stuff that is very Catholic can still remind us that there's some beauty there that maybe we can learn from.
Right. If anybody gets the impression that I was kind of rejecting the film because of its
Yeah,
being a very Catholic film, not the case at all.
yeah,
Um, I think the film is worthwhile. Just understand it is shot from a Catholic perspective. That the director is a Catholic, and
yeah.
that's he. I think you hit really the nail on the head at the very beginning. It's a devotional film.
Yes, it is.
Um,
So let me ask you a question because I've been thinking about this.
okay.
Do you think it would have been less effective or more effective if he would have chosen to try to be more historically grounded? So had he chosen to have Jesus whipped 30 odd times, but not 80 odd times, had he chosen to have Jesus carry the crossbeam and not his whole cross, had he chosen to put them a couple feet off the ground, not 6 feet off the ground, you know, would that have lessened the impact of it, or do you think that would have helped the impact of it?
Boy, that's hard to say. This let's remember. I mean, this film had a huge impact when it came out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was at one point, I think, the highest grossing R-rated film ever.
Yeah,
It's been
got
surpassed
beaten
but
by
since, but
Deathpool, I think, or Deadpool.
Deadpool and Wolverine, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
that's a long time. This came
yeah.
out in
Oh
the
yeah,
early 2000s, right?
yeah,
So 20 some years, it was
yeah,
the highest grossing R-rated film ever.
yeah,
Um, I think the details would have made a difference for Theo nerds like you and I.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I don't think it makes a lot of difference for the average faithful person who would go and see it.
Mhm.
I think for a lot of these people, look, the reality is most of us have seen a number of Jesus films. We have seen Jesus crucified in a number of ways. So
Yeah.
people who come at it very casually don't really know.
Mhm.
They haven't looked into the details. They don't know that, the nails went definitely through his wrist
Yeah,
because if they'd gone here, they would have torn out. They
yeah,
don't know that they would have, nailed his feet to the side of the
yeah,
cross through the ankles instead
yeah,
of in front of the cross and crossed over the top or this
yeah,
way, like,
mhm,
like we see it in this film.
yeah,
But, does that, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that makes a big difference to the
sure.
fact that he went there by choice,
Yeah,
that it was a voluntary sacrifice, and whatever the fashion of it was is really not consequential
yeah,
to the reality of it.
yeah,
So, yeah, but it's still, I mean, like I said, for us theological nerds, we kind of like, no, that's not right. I get it.
yeah,
I do
yeah.
it. I did it. I did it.
Um, another one of to me, a powerful scene. And again, it talks about another. atonement theory. I'd be curious to know if he was thinking atonement theories because he hit a lot of them. But one is moral atonement theory, which is moral influence atonement theory, which is basically when we see Jesus go through what he went through, it breaks our hearts and opens us to the possibility of God transforming them. Okay.
Mm.
So basically, it reminds us of our sinfulness and it kind of propels us to want to engage God so we can change.
So
And
is he doing that with Simon Cyrene?
that's exactly the scene I was thinking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Because you get in that scene this guy that's very hostile to Jesus. He's kind of like, I might get crucified because you can't carry your cross, dork. Like basically,
Right.
that's where he starts off with. And then seeing Jesus go through and seeing, I would argue, the silent kind of dignity and forgiveness and care he shows on the way
Yeah.
opens and breaks his heart to the point that and what's beautiful in scripture, and I feel like we miss it all the time, is I believe it's in Mark. Mark introduces Simon of Cyrene and going, the father of Alexander and Rufus. And that seems to imply that the community Mark was writing to knew Alexander and Rufus. They were
Rufus, right.
part of the community.
Right.
And he was going, hey, their dad did this, which to me is just a beautiful little nugget of scripture that we oftentimes don't think about.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so at least in the film,
Yeah.
he's even though he's in what, maybe 15 minutes of the film,
Yeah. Mhm.
he has this huge story arc, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, if you know the story, he goes off and is converted and he goes off and becomes most likely a figure in the early church to the
Yeah.
point where Mark can reference his kids and everybody goes, oh yeah, I know their kids and
Oh
oh
yeah.
that's yeah.
Oh, we've heard about that guy. Yeah.
So again, I think it is one of the things that I think is powerful about this movie is it can break your heart. And I do think there's some truth to the moral influence theory of atonement that by seeing and reflecting and being kind of put in front of us the evilness of how we can react to people and the coldness and heartlessness we can react to people and seeing someone respond in love and grace really can transform us through God's grace. Like that, I do think that is true.
And we preach that, don't we? I mean that is it's something that you know part of your faith journey is coming to understand that he's done this not just for the world, he's done this for you personally. Um yeah. Yeah, and we could probably go a long way off into some of some of these atonement theories. And what's interesting is, as we have talked about them, and we've talked about
Yeah.
several during this
Mhm.
Lent, I'm starting to formulate in my head. I wonder if there's a sermon series in that, and each week doing sort of a teaching about a different
Well,
atonement theory.
it's funny because Adam Hamilton is actually that's what he's doing right now at his
Is he
church.
really? See, and I'm not following him right now, so that's
Yeah.
surprising. All right.
He's actually doing every week's a different actually every week is two atonement theories because he preaches for 40 minutes, so he could do that.
Okay, well, that's a lot. I can't preach for 40 minutes.
Come on, Don, get your act together, man. Step up your game.
Yeah, I would like to be able to, not move tomorrow.
Yeah, what are your last thoughts about this movie? Is there anything
Um,
else?
I think that, in the grand scheme of things, it is an important film. I think it is a film that is well worth seeing as a Christian. I think it has to come with caveats and not so much about the theology, but about the violence.
Mm,
I have known people who could not watch this film
yeah,
because of the graphic nature of it.
yeah,
And not because they were too young, but because it just stirred up too much for them. And I
yeah.
understand that. I think that's a good cautionary angle to this.
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand that it is not the be all and end all. It is not the final say um, on this. And by the way, Gibson doesn't believe it's the final say because he's working on a sequel
Yep.
that's supposed to come out next year. So,
That that's going to be one I think more evangelicals are going to struggle with because it's going to be about the mostly about his 3 days in the grave, which a lot of evangelicals struggle with the idea of him going down to hell and all the stuff that's
hmm
part of the early creeds. So
hmm
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So worth seeing, yes.
yeah,
Understand it is R-rated for a very good reason. There are very few Jesus movies that are R-rated. This one is, and it
yeah,
is for a very good reason.
yeah.
So understand that. It's not a movie for your kids, even though the subject matter feels like, well, my kids should know this. Yes,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
you
And I
know,
the big caveat I would give or the big asterisk I would give is to be mindful of the times that God seems to be um, punishing people that have hurt Jesus or wronged Jesus. I would argue that that does cut against and undermine the the central tenet of the gospel story.
yeah,
And to
forgiveness.
keep that in
Yeah.
mind, yeah,
Yeah.
forgiveness and mercy, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. But all in all,
good
look,
film.
I know Christians that watch this film every year.
I do. I show it
You're
to my
one of them.
family.
But and for reason enough. I mean, it's worth at least understanding, like I said, the sacrifice. That's a
Again,
big,
it's a really good devotional piece to do on Good Friday.
yeah. I can't argue with that. I think that's a profound idea. I might even do it myself.
Yeah,
So that should bring us to the end of discussing this film.
yeah,
Now, for next week, we are watching, I don't know what year the film came out, but we're watching Risen.
yeah.
Risen is stars Joseph Fiennes and Tom Felton. For those of you who don't know who Tom Felton is, if you've seen Harry Potter, he's Draco Malfoy. And it is in a nutshell, it's basically the story. It is a fictionalized story of a Roman centurion who is investigating the empty tomb.
Yeah.
So it's an Easter story. We'll leave it at that. As the podcast for that will come out on Good Friday. So we'll be watching Risen during Holy Week.
Yeah.
Um, and After that, we're gonna carry on one more week after Easter into a very religious themed film. Even though, I mean, that's what we talk about every week, right? We
Yeah.
we kind of pull the theology and the practical theology at least out of whatever we're watching.
Yeah.
But we're gonna stay on kind of a Jesus movie for one extra week just because it's in the popular zeitgeist right now. We want to talk about it. So we'll let you all figure that one out until until we get to it. Uh, but that is all for this week, friends. Take care. Keep on finding God in the dark. We'll see you next week.
Right.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.